What's up? Welcome to a new episode of Movie Schmovie. This is a very special episode of Movie Schmovie. This is episode number 410, and we are representing this episode Baltimore. It's our home area code. We've all decided that this episode is going to be dedicated to all things Baltimore: movies, TV shows, moments, whatever it might be, that either were made in Baltimore or about Baltimore, have any connection to our hometowns where we currently rest our heads. Well, Ronald, you're a little outside, but we're close enough.
Yeah,
We still
yeah.
consider you as such. But yeah, I'm Steve, one of the co-hosts, and as always, I'm joined by.
Ron.
Not a problem, Bob. I had to because there was a good one this time.
It
But it's
just
me.
is.
It's
Yeah.
me, John.
John, how are you?
I'm all right.
Are you sure?
Yes, I was thinking like I'm the most like what is how far back do you both go? Are you from Baltimore, Ronald? Like you grew up in Baltimore.
Yeah, my birth certificate, I was born in a Baltimore hospital.
So you were born around here too. Your family's around here, right?
Yeah.
Yep. Yep.
So I'm
Never left.
so I may live more in the center of Baltimore than any of us at the moment,
You
but
do.
I didn't come here until 1999. So what does that mean? My Baltimore status, like, I in a couple of years I will have lived here as long as I lived in Alabama. But
Which is wild.
it's really wild when you get to.
How does that
It
feel?
just means I'm old. All that means is that, it's like whenever you do, wow, I've been here a really long time. But no, it is interesting because I do think doing this episode, I realized that if I'd done it 10 years ago, 15 years ago, my feelings
Yeah,
about Baltimore would have been maybe not too different,
Sure.
but like it would have just been I had a whole different feeling. Like now I feel much
yeah,
more like I've been here through more stuff and I feel more connected to the place. But I mean, really once I'd been here just a few years, we knew we were sticking around. There
yeah.
were a lot of things to keep us here. But it's just a weird place. I mean, you must accept growing up in a place when someone comes here from far away, they might think, wow, this is kind of a weird place. Baltimore
Yeah,
has
for
so
sure.
many different little nuances to it that are you really have to be here to get.
Yeah. I think you're past the point. So there's a scene in Last Black Man in San Francisco where one of the characters is on the bus and he's hearing two women just shit on San Francisco, annihilate it. And he's like, "Are you from here?" And they said no. I'm like, well, you can't talk shit about it. And I think you're past the point. You've been here long enough
Hmm.
that you really do know about the nuance of it, a lot of the stuff. So it's, you're a citizen, you're here. You're a Baltimorean at this
I'm a
point.
Baltimorean,
You
right?
really are. You are. You're so entrenched in the culture. I'd say, yeah, you're
Well,
here,
when I
man.
go home, they tell me I smell of crab, and they make me sleep outside. No,
Take it with you, right?
yeah,
But not any crab, just blue crab. You smell like
yeah,
blue crab.
right,
Oh,
exactly.
because any other crab
Blue
is,
crab in Old Bay.
yeah. Yeah. Um, yeah.
But yeah, we'll
So,
we'll dive right into this. We're going to kind of come at Baltimore from different directions in this episode. And I guess we'll get a little bit later. Maybe we'll have some kind of bigger thoughts about the way that Baltimore is depicted in movies and what the kind of world representation of Baltimore is. But for our
mhm.
first segment, it is the required viewing segment, and it is my pick. And this is not necessarily a Baltimore movie, but it was shot partially here, and it definitely has the kind of earmarks of you can feel the Baltimore nest that they tried to capture, but also it's set largely in Baltimore, even when it's not shot here. There's a lot of stuff that was shot in Philadelphia, but it just has the feel of this general area. And I will just kind of throw it to you guys and say that like one of the things that really stood out to me about this movie was how much like when people go to this area, it seems that they want like urban decay. Like let's use Baltimore,
They
let's use Philly
do.
to create a set. Like we need a post-apocalyptic world that is still a city. They choose like Philadelphia or Baltimore. I think there's probably architectural reasons why that happens, and maybe there's budgetary reasons. But I think it's an interesting choice to to make this a Baltimore story. This particular grim, gray, a kind of fatalistic story to make this one into a Baltimore movie. What did you guys think? And when this movie came out, did you see it and did you have any sense of it's like set in Baltimore? for the most part.
I honestly didn't. You know, one thing I do remember. So like one thing that was really big in the 90s was dogs. I don't know if you remember this, Steve, but like in the 90s, when you went into Baltimore, there were just a bunch of dogs. Like there just
Yeah.
wasn't you would go to somebody's house to a cookout, and then you'd see like two dogs walking down the street, and it was just like they were out of control. Pest control, I mean not pest control,
Pest control. Animal
dog
control.
controls, animal controls become like a very paramount thing into sort of the new version of Baltimore that we've kind of come to see. I've never seen so much newspaper on the ground as I did in this movie. Why was there so much newspaper? That's like the urban decay. It's like tilted trash cans. Um, uh, uh typically like incoherent sort of bums on the ground, vagabonds, and newspaper. I don't know what it is about newspaper. It's like the wind blowing in newspaper and tilted trash cans seem to be
Lots of trash cans. Now the question
the
is,
math of a
were the trash cans tilted, or was it just the camera that was tilted? Because Terry Gilliam, director of 12 Monkeys, did I say the name of the movie before? I hope I did. 12 Monkeys, but Terry Gilliam loves Dutch angles and funny angles, you know.
Yeah. Maybe it's a little of both. I think it's a little of both.
It is. Oh man, that is some so that is a wacky. That's going to be super wacky then. If it's like a Terry Gilliam shot of an already crooked trash can.
If a crooked trash can shot crooked, is it just laying down at that point?
Yeah, right. It depends on if it's crooked in opposite directions, then it balances out, and you're just like, look at how straight that
Which
trash
way we
can
going?
is.
Yeah.
With the trash can, it's laying down. Against it, it's just standing up, right? I mean,
These are the real questions of this movie.
that's where we go.
Right.
That's where we go.
One of the other things I think, since we're talking about Terry Gilliam's shooting style, I do think it's worth mentioning that he does use lenses that give like a lot of detail. Like there's a lot of places for your eyes to go in a shot, and he doesn't really want to point you too much in one direction or make it too. So like when you see those wide angle shots that have such I'm going to use terms. I think it's like a deep. It's like a lot of depth of field, so that you're actually what's in focus, what your eye can latch onto. There's a lot in that scene. It's not like shot where it's focusing on the thing they really want you to pay attention to. I think that's a thing that he does in his movies, but I think you can really feel it in this film. There's, I don't know, just the art direction and a lot of the scenes, and a lot of those newspapers you're talking about, Ronald. Like a lot of that stuff is just Terry Gilliam's love of packing the scene with detail. So if he's going to do urban decay, he's going to have newspapers blowing in the street and graffiti everywhere and bombed out buildings, and heck, he's going to throw in a bear, running around in the background. But this is an interesting film for a lot of reasons when I look at it now, because it's a period in Bruce Willis's career where he was kind of looking for this kind of role, and I guess he always did kind of do unusual kind of leading man roles. He did seek them out. And also for Terry Gilliam, this is right after Fisher King, or close after Fisher King, which was a big hit for him. So this is at a time when Terry Gilliam was kind of the guy that might direct a big studio picture with Bruce Willis and Brad Pitt. And I really don't think that, I mean, I guess it's not like he didn't have big movies after that, but this was sort of like, that was the height of Terry Gilliam's kind of mainstream career, so to speak. He's continued to make movies, but they were sort of, each one gets a little bit more niche than the last. So I didn't know, going into this, Steve, did you watch this movie when it came out? And were you much of a Terry Gilliam guy, or was it a Brad Pitt thing? Like what would have taken you to this movie?
Probably, yeah. I mean, probably more Bruce Willis and Brad Pitt. I mean, definitely Brad Pitt. He's my number one all over. But and also just because it's kind of like just an out there performance of his. It's kind of what a lot of people talk about. Maybe it's I don't know, some of his more interesting performances. This is always in the conversation, and even Bruce Willis. I mean, I think it's an underrated Bruce Willis performance, who I think is underrated a lot in general for a lot of his lead roles. But yeah, I don't know. Like I just the post-apocalyptic, the mystery element, the kind of landscape that's created both in the future and in the film's present. I just love those kinds of like putting the pieces together, and like even like the performance specifically from Brad Pitt. It's like it's kind of like that it's kind of the performance is a part of the film's mystery before you even know where it falls into the mystery. You know,
Yeah.
in the sense that like it's so uh rabid that like you don't know
Twitchy.
where, yeah, like you don't know where one part of that personality stops and one starts. Like there's a you know there's this artist and there's this you know just this villain, I guess, you know, that you don't really understand until you see the film from, you know, the beginning to end. But I don't know, I just, it always stuck with me as a movie that I was always engaged in, and like really, and I think it's the performances really, and not to forget what's Madeline Stowe, um, in kind of like, you know, that mid '90s run where I think all three of them kind of were maybe arguably at the top of their game in some ways. But yeah, I don't know. I've always sought out Gilliam's films. I don't know. I don't think I've always like kind of been in the pocket for like I'll see, you know, anything that he does, or I've not,
Right.
I'm not as familiar with a lot of his films as you probably are.
No, I
Um
mean, I haven't seen like for someone who up through this movie was kind of like religiously into his stuff.
right.
I mean, it's not like that's when I fell off, but there's a few of his
Mm-hmm.
more recent ones, you know, two or three at least that I have never seen. And
Scene.
I have to say, his public image now as kind of a crank and a guy who, you know, opens his mouth and says shit he probably doesn't need to opine about.
Right.
I
Right.
sort of feel like it's cooled me on like wanting to go and like, you know, rescue the diamonds in the rough from that period of his career. But I do think the
Mm-hmm.
guy's an amazing visual stylist, and
Sure.
he never quite got to that point where he was working with whoever he wanted to because of his profile and his successes. But this movie is a mark of right, like, you know, Madeline Stowe was a kind of a rising star still at this point, or she was a solid star. Bruce Willis was definitely in a, you know, I don't know. I actually don't know what his movies around this were, but he's always had a hit somewhere in the mix. It seems like through, you know, periods of his career. So I remember it seeming like another, like after The Fisher King had Robin Williams and Jeff Bridges in it, this felt like another kind of, you know, Hollywood film from Terry Gilliam, who could make these other films that were super hard to find. I know, Ronald, you said your dad was a Baron Munchausen fan, right? He had that.
Yeah, he was obsessed with it. Um,
And that was a
I
hard movie to
watched.
find. Like, you know, it's not like it was everywhere. It was, you know, it wasn't in theaters long. It wasn't in a lot of places. And in
Yeah,
Brazil was legendary, but it was not a movie that it was like, you know, until a few years later, it wasn't easy to find in like, you know, the right edit and the best format and everything.
yeah. I honestly wish I could have asked him why he was so upset. Like he would attach himself to he would attach himself to these really unique movies, and he would repeat lines over and over and over and over and over again. He loved film in a way that I had never really met anybody that did besides him. I still don't know anybody that talks about movies like him, and repeats lines like him. Um, yeah, so Baron Munchausen was my introduction to Terry Gilliam, and every time I went to his house, he was watching it. He had either finished it or that or City Children of Men.
Oh,
So, you know,
that's good.
those were like his two, but especially that one, Baron Munchausen. So yeah, this movie is a hard watch, to be completely honest with you. I can't figure out like it, not because it's, I like that it has the science fiction element, obviously huge science fiction stuff in it, huge themes. Um, the time travel thing's really unclear. Like I'm like, what is going on? But there's something about it that works. There's something about it, you know. I'm like, is this Fauci? Is this like, you know, he's trying to like tell, he's
I
like,
know it's like
look.
it's tough to know, like, because at the very end you find out, like, I mean, I don't know, it does evolve. I do think there's a manic quality to this film, Ronald, that
Yeah,
makes
yeah.
kind of when you say a hard watch, it is a bit jittery. Like the performances are kind of raw.
Hmm.
And even Madeline Stowe and Bruce Willis's relationship, which it's realistic, I think, that it's like not like he's basically kidnapping her and you know, bullying her sort of into doing stuff rough, like late into the movie. and
Yeah.
she's still acting very, like treating him like someone. Like I guess there's a time jump where we can understand that she's come to change her mind about him a little bit. But I
Yeah.
guess I appreciated how much they paid off the reality of that situation, that she would basically feel like, who is this guy, and why is he kidnapping me? I do think that's the kind of thing that makes this a hard watch, is that it's a lot of like raw emotions and yelling and freaking out and bleeding and ripping out your teeth and drooling, and it's got, there's an intensity to it, and even the score, the way that it weaves through the movie, it would just be
Yeah.
blaring at odd times. Sometimes even the sound mix is a little odd. I don't doubt that was like a hallucinatory thing that
Right.
Terry Gilliam was trying to do, but there's also ways in which any Terry Gilliam movie, you have to look at it and say, well, was this movie also kind of patched together from what they had? Because his movies are notoriously kind of messy, and he shoots a lot of stuff that may be hard to fit together in an editing room and make a coherent, as you were saying, Ronald, kind of sci-fi story. Because you do expect a sci-fi story to kind of spell out the rules for you a little bit. I
Right.
did, though, like what this movie does instead, which is like give you this kind of almost dreamlike, or it is sort of hallucinatory, like what's actually going on. I think Terry Gilliam loves that stuff, but I do think it makes the movie feel a little bit like it's holding out secrets on you that maybe if you had a little more footing in the beginning, it'd be easier to get invested in the characters, rather than just it's the acting that kind of brings you into the character. It's because it's Bruce Willis that you
Yeah.
that you
Yeah.
feel for
Yeah.
this guy.
Sure.
But yeah, but in the end, the other thing I thought was kind of interesting about it that I wanted to ask you guys about was just the sort of the way the movie plays with you knowing, you can sort of figure out what's happening as it gets closer to the end, and then it becomes this thing of like, can you change fate, or is fate going to be changed? But I actually thought some of those, like the way that Bruce Willis is, or Jack, what's his name, James Cole, the way he's behaving going into that final scene where we are sort of pretty sure we saw him getting shot. You know what I mean? Like once he has the wig on and he's wearing the Hawaiian shirt, it's like, oh, isn't he the guy who got shot in that other scene? But I felt
Right.
like there was something kind of potent about that idea, that you spend the last 15-20 minutes of the movie going like, well, he's going to die, right? Like it made him feel so much more tragic. And I had sort of forgotten that that's an aspect
Yeah.
of this movie, is that this guy's
Yeah.
sort of just fucking punished the whole time. There's really not much of a way out for him. Did you guys, I mean, even if you found the movie a little bit of a hard watch, Ronald, did you find that to be like a satisfying resolution to the story?
Oh, so sad, man. Like, you're right. Like, I'm like, that didn't look like the guy. Like, I'm like, that's not Bruce Willis, right? Like, they got shot. But then as he puts the stuff on, you're right. Like, there's like this kind of realization that, like, oh, yeah, he's the guy. And he remembers it. He remembers his own death, and he can't do anything to stop it. And when it happens, it's just like, you know, everything's crazy until it happens. You know what I mean? Like that's the wild part about like all of this stuff. Like I was like,
Right.
this must have been how Fauci felt. Like he's like talking to people. He's like, look, God damn it, it's a thing. It's a real thing. People gonna get hurt. It's like, oh, go ahead, and
Right.
then things happen. Like there's nothing gratifying about it. You know what I mean? Like even when you're right, after you're right, there's no like, I told you so. When you talking to a dead body, like I told you should have listened to me. It's like that. There's nothing satisfying about being right when it comes to this kind of thing, or wrong. I mean, like it just is a strange battle, and but it was satisfying. It was really satisfying. I thought that
Well, I mean, I guess
watching,
they do stop it, right? I guess that's the other odd thing, is it seems
yeah,
like
they stop it.
it
Yeah,
seems like they catch the guy on the plane, so that means
yeah,
maybe everybody doesn't die. I think that's where the whole thing you're talking about, Ronald. We don't feel like we understand what the causal loop of this film is the way we normally
yeah.
do in a science fiction film with time travel. What about you, Steve? Do you feel like the ending kind of wrapped up the? Do you think it was more of like an emotional ending, or do you think it wrapped up the kind of sci-fi, pandemic threat storyline as well?
I think, yeah, I kind of felt it went both ways for
Yeah.
me. I mean, I
Mm.
think it kind of just took you on this kind of journey to kind of figure out what was going to happen, or how you could change, the future, and ultimately kind of deciding to go back to the past to be with this woman, and that's the vision. Like it's like a snake eating its own tail kind of thing, you know. It's this idea of like all this was just a story to tell you how it became to be, you know. I like that idea of like the story that we just watched is really the story that created uh like the story that we watched was a story of him trying to stop something from happening possibly, or finding a solution to fix the future. But
Right.
it's like the story that you watch is actually what created, you know, his fate, you know, the story
Yeah.
of, you know, how tragic that is, like you were saying earlier. So I think I kind of felt like it works both ways. Honestly, rewatching it, I hadn't watched it in a long time.
Me either.
And I think it still works pretty well, honestly, for me at least. uh I thought it was pretty great.
I love all the sort of I mean, it's Terry Gilliam obviously loves to cast like people with some like, you know, memorable faces. There's a lot of just
Yeah.
the
Sure.
like the team of people that are sort of watching over him in the future scenes that are kind of running as the program that he's part of. Like they were an interesting bunch. And I loved
Yeah.
seeing, I don't know if you noticed the kind of head psychiatrist that has those a couple scenes with Madeline Stowe. That was Frank Gorshin, who played the Riddler on the Adam West Batman.
Oh
Mm.
wow.
And once you know it, once you picture it, once it clicked for me, I was like, oh yeah, that's definitely Frank Gorshin. And then of course, you know, I saw that name in the credits, and it kind of confirmed it. But no, it's like I think there's an effort to sort of you know, bring interesting looking actors, and that's like a that's like a cool aspect of this film, is that there's a lot of small parts that are kind of memorable just because of the look of the person. I guess I'd ask you guys, what's your favorite twitch of Brad Pitt's character? Do you like the way his eyes look in different directions and one of them is like way bigger than the other? Do you like that he flips the bird with both fingers all the time in that
Yeah.
situation? Or do you like the sort of like he kind of gets up and he sort of conducts the words that he's saying and kind of does these broad hand motions? Which of those was your favorite?
I I think the conducting hand thing, because he kind of did that when he jumped from bed to bed.
Yeah.
I love that. He just kind of got up and knocked everything down and started jumping from cot to cot.
Yeah, but he bears his ass and then jumps around on all the beds.
Yeah, yeah.
I love how Brad Pitt can like bear his ass in a movie, and he's like, I'm this disgusting weird guy in this bad situation, you know, and I'm going to show you my butt, and it's like he still knows he has a nice butt in that
Yeah,
scene.
It's
yeah.
Brad Pitt, you know.
I,
Tone, but
this is like a butt heavy movie. We get to see some Willis tush too. That was like a big
yeah.
deal in like 80s and 90s action movies. It was seemed like they wanted to show the guy's ass if possible, you know?
Yeah. That was a thing. Man. I think about wasn't he naked in um Die Hard with a Vengeance? When he
Was
had
he?
that sign on, was he nude? Was he nude at that part? At the beginning, we had the N word on the.
Yeah.
Wasn't he nude at that part? I feel like
You might
I
be
feel like there's
right.
a lot of like Bruce Willis nudity. That scene is so crazy to me because Samuel Jackson's trying to like protect him. He's like, look, you should get away from him when these people kill you in this city. But
I want to
yeah.
watch that movie again. I haven't seen it in a
Oh,
while.
I need to rewatch it too. It's been a while.
Been a while.
But I think that was Bruce Willis tush in that too.
Yeah. Well, he's a tush. He's a tushy guy.
He's got a there was that one movie he was in, what's it called? The Color of Night,
Yeah.
where like it's like frontal nudity, but
Yeah.
it's like not actually, I think, him. But I don't know. I remember it being a whole big thing when that came out. But
No, I remember that story too. I did not know that
yeah,
it wasn't him, but I do remember that being
it
like
maybe it was him, but you don't actually see it, or it's
yeah.
cut. I don't know. But it was a whole. It's a pretty steamy scene.
Yeah, I think I liked it a lot more than I thought I would. I was feeling so like frustrated when I first started watching it. It landed the plane, man. Like it has a insanity to it, but I liked it. I was like, oh man, this is watch more Terry Gilliam stuff.
Well, I mean, it did make me want to like rewatch a couple things that I remember really loving, and it also made me want to maybe give a couple of those later things a shot. But at the
Mm.
same time, I'm not in a hurry to like, you know,
You're right,
like
right.
praise
Yeah,
him
for
right
sure.
now. But I mean, it's like I'm not going to try to be that like guy. I mean, you know, it's not like he's committed any crimes, but he did say some pretty stupid, bullheaded things that make it a little hard to like want to get into his mind, especially when so often the story of a Terry Gilliam movie is like how hard it was to make it and how much he clashed with producers and all that stuff. This is like a successful, he brought it in like I think under budget and just a week over schedule, which for him is like amazing. You know, so it is sort of a you know, this is not the Terry Gilliam that I've kind of started to roll my eyes at. The guy who seems to like just always make things, I don't know, maybe it's unfair, but I've always suspected like he's making things harder for himself in some way. But maybe it's just hard to get movies made on the scale that he wants to make them, you know, when he wants to, like his ideas are 60, $70 million movies.
Yeah, for sure.
And that you just don't get that kind of money unless you make a lot more money for the studios than he makes for them. So it's always a battle. And this movie, you don't really feel that. So many of his movies are the story of that. Like Baron Munchausen in Brazil, there's like the story of going up against the system, you know, kind of baked into the movies. And this is got that, but it's much more like the screenplay, even from the ground up. It's a more conventional kind of, you know, mainstream thriller. So yeah, no, I enjoyed going back through this this little trip as well. Ronald, I believe that means you're next up on required viewing. So we'll go back to Baltimore in just a second.
Okay.
But yeah, what's your non-Baltimore pick for
I
next?
feel like this is something that Steve will have seen before, but I'm still gonna throw it out there. I was going down a list of like natural disaster movies that you should see because for some reason I've been in a natural disaster bag, and 2015's The Wave. It's a Norwegian movie. I heard like I need to watch it, and I have never watched it. And it's thrown around. Somebody just randomly talked about this tsunami movie, and I'm like,
Yeah.
oh, okay. The Wave it is. Oh, you saw it before, Steve. I can
I have.
see.
You can tell when
There's
Steve's
like
seen something.
there's a Steve movie. It's like well made. You know, there's like a profile, well made, family drama sometimes, but a
Right.
natural disaster. You down for
I'm in.
the cause.
I'm in.
But yeah, I'm really interested in seeing it. Have you seen it before, John? Have you
Oh
heard
no,
of The
I mean
Wave?
I know of it, maybe the same way that you've heard of it, just in the same context of
Yeah,
like it's supposed to be good, you know. And then it
yeah.
always sounds like talk about a tough watch. This kind of movie can be sort of like I just have to decide I want that stress level because if it's done well, it will be incredibly
Right.
stressful. And
Yeah,
you
yeah,
know the it says right in the genre, disaster.
yeah, yeah.
And then
And that's
movie, gosh,
one.
if there's anything that stresses me out more than a disaster, it's a movie.
Right, just the fact that it says
Ooh.
it.
That is on Hulu, by the way.
Awesome.
Oh, cool,
Looks
cool.
like, yeah.
Ooh.
Hulu.
So you can watch it for not free, but the money that you've paid already. You know, you can watch it for the money you
that's
paid
it.
already.
That's how they say it.
Yeah. Cool.
Awesome.
I'm
Well,
excited, man. I'm excited.
so The Wire.
Yes.
Like,
you know,
let's just get it out of the way,
let's
right?
get it out of the way.
Just-
Well, but I mean,
let's
it would
get
be easy
this-
to literally do this episode and just talk about The Wire because if there's anything that kind of like is so Baltimore that it hurts. I
Sure.
think The Wire, I think it still holds up. Like I have not watched The Wire much in a long time. I don't know if you guys had the experience of kind of digging back through whatever process you went through and kind of being reminded of scenes or whatever, but like I feel like I feel like a rewatch of The Wire would do my body good at some point just because it's that memorable and like episode to episode there's so much great dialogue and so much great character stuff. So I don't know if did you both have that kind of reacquainting yourself with The Wire for this little topic, or did you do you feel like you just kind of went from your gut and didn't really have to think too hard choosing a moment?
I went from just my gut, my memory. I mean, there's so many. You know, we could talk about that as a series. That could be its own series. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But like, yeah, I mean, just I haven't watched it in a bit. But there's definitely a lot of moments that stand out that I feel like a lot of people would say are like the key moments in the show or memorable scenes or whatnot. But I just kind of there's a piece of the show that's always been one of my favorite elements of the show, and I'm a little biased when it comes into it because I have a connection to a part of the show, like not like a major connection, but an experience that I had that probably made it even more so for me. So I just kind of went with that feeling, and that's kind of what I'll talk about.
You want to get us started?
Sure. Yeah, I was gonna say. So the when I think of the show, like I said, there's tons of characters, tons of scenes. This, you could talk about which season's your favorite, whatever. But for me, a character that I always thought was like such a one of the most realistic and tragic, and just I always had such a connection to while watching. And he's a character that survives the show. He's every season of the show, and he kind of gets this end the show on probably one of the brightest notes of any character, especially where he starts the show on.
Mm-hmm.
But there's a scene that I'm talking about Bubbles, Reginald Cousins. Andre Royo was in a film when I used to work for the film studio that I used to work for to do marketing. He was in a movie called G that came out, and they did a lot of promotion for it in Baltimore at the African American History Museum downtown. And I got to be with him for a few days and take him around, do press for it. We got to hang out, have meals together. He was just like one of the nicest people I've ever met that has anything to do with celebrity or whatever level of celebrity it is. But in Baltimore, he's a celebrity. Like we walked around town everywhere, and people would call him Bubbles. Like they would that's who he was. But there's a scene in the series, when he basically has the moment at the NA meeting where he kind of talks, where he kind of basically his speech in where he talks about Sherrod and his part in that, and just the way he kind of, I don't even know, like just kind of processes everything that's really happened through the whole series for him. And Fletcher's there, and he's like listening to it, and what comes after it with the story, and kind of where he gets to end the show. But that speech itself, and him sharing that in that moment at the meeting, just was kind of like a culmination for me. I just remember being kind of emotional watching it. Before I even met him, that was just like a feeling, because that was one of those characters that felt so low on the totem pole of the show. It felt like one of the pawns. Like one of the other great sequences is the conversation about chess in the show, and like I always kind of felt like Bubbles was kind of one of the pawns. And I just feel like that scene was such just a great encapsulation of the journey that character took, going from a character that had connections to every element of the show, really, to the street level stuff, to the drug dealers, to the cops, to the newspapers, to just the street. I love the
and he was
character.
vulnerable. He was vulnerable at every one of those levels. You know what I mean,
Right,
Steve? Like
right.
that's the thing that made him so tragic throughout the whole show, was that it just felt like he was getting kind of ground up. And it's not like we didn't see him make mistakes, but he seemed doomed,
Right.
And so you're right. I thought you were going to mention the moment towards the very end of that episode, which is
Where
like,
he goes,
like
he goes
him going up the stairs is so,
yeah.
because it's a visual image that like conveys so much about where he is. But I think you might be right if you're talking about like just the acting, the emotion, the release. The scene you're talking about is has a heaviness that is like almost like a bottom, but also like we just haven't seen this character confront, like be this honest and this healthy in a way about the way that he's dealing with it. Like I don't know, because we'd seen him try and try and try and try, but never really make it out. And I think that was a super satisfying.
And I think like the scene of going up the steps is like the other side of the moment.
Yeah.
And like kind of going up and cooking the meal for.
Yeah, basically his sister, who was letting him live in the basement, but didn't
and,
trust him in the house.
And then seeing him with his niece and stuff, like that was like the other side. But like that moment at the meeting to me was like him kind of accepting his hand in Sherrod's death, and like I don't know, his hand in the death of a child, basically, I think was like a turning point in terms of how hard he'd been working between, season 4 and 5 to be clean.
Yeah.
And to have that moment in that meeting and to lead the meeting and to have Fletcher there and realize like, that was the story that they were going to write in the paper would be Bubbles' story, was just like a really awesome, just a nice moment. I don't know, just like a great moment for that character to turn the corner and to end the show on the other side of it. I felt like was great, but that speech is it's incredible to me.
Right, a character who so totally could have been a casualty of this show's kind of kind of
Right, and he kind
hard
of gets to the end of the
edge.
series,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
he's on the better side of it. It's just the exception, not the rule.
What about you, Ronald? Do you feel like the Wire stuff is like always fresh in your mind, like kind of what Steve was saying? He kind of knew the moment, or did you have to dig back through
Oh
and
no, I didn't have to dig.
yeah.
I watch The Wire every 2 to 3 years. I'm
Hmm.
due. I'm actually due. I never. I haven't watched the new version, the like ups, the like 1080p version.
Oh, there is a new
I
version.
cannot. Yeah, there's a new version, more landscape, better sound. I'm pretty excited about watching that. But yeah, like it is so simple, and it is the first thing you ever see of this show. It's the first scene. Baltimore has a very contentious
Is that Snot
relationship with the,
Boogie?
yeah.
Okay.
Baltimore has a very contentious relationship with police, like every other city. But there used to be, when I was younger, sort of like beat cops, cops that were specifically on your block, that knew like a radius, like a 6 block radius. It was officer whoever, and they knew moms, they knew kids. They would play basketball sometimes. McNulty represents this part of humanity that you don't hear about a lot. Like, there's a couple of things that are very unique to the scene. He's sitting beside a guy. A lot of cops don't even talk, don't even want to be near you. He's sitting beside this kid and asking about Snap Boogie. And Snap Boogie, he snatches the money from the dice game every time. And he asked them why they let him play. He said, "This is America, man. Like, this America." And if you don't understand what that is, then you don't understand the show. And the
Right.
way he responds to it, there's a very different, the way McNulty responds, that smile that he has, he understands these people. He
Yeah.
understands people in general, which is very different. If that's one of my favorite things about this show, how everybody talks about criminals on the street and how McNulty talks about people on the street. People are like, a lot of cops are like, this scumbag piece of trash. He's like, nah, like his mom, works here. I know her up here. It's just this connection to people, so you understand how this system works. Everybody in the hood isn't terrible. There's a couple people who create this, like they're the Resident Evils. Those are the people that create the chaos, and then 90% of everybody else is just trying to move through it. Move through the chaos, and that kind of represents it. And if
Yeah.
you don't understand, like, and if people don't understand what that is, how somebody from impoverished place can just decide, yeah, I don't like where I am, I'm going to do something to make my life better. If you don't understand that, you don't understand how America works, because there's moonshiners, there's an evolution of these people that have kind of come from nothing, that have created these illegal sort of schemes to get rich, some of which have very famous names on the end, Kennedy being one of them, who, are staples in the culture.
Hmm.
So the scene is very special to me. It makes me kind of teary-eyed because it really represents all of us. It's like, if we can't talk to each other like that, then what is the point of being here?
Yeah.
What's the point of it? And McNulty was one of those people that really saw the humanity in people, um, throughout the show, no matter what was happening. Even when Stringer was in the courtroom, when they first talked, like, it's a chess battle for him.
Yeah.
It's like, I'm trying to get you out of this community so that you aren't, a terrorist, essentially. So I love that stuff. I love the chess that, and McNulty is the Wire. I don't know. It's
Yeah.
like him
Yeah.
and the guy that created the Wire, the older black dude. It's like those two are the only two that really understand any of this. None of them really give a shit about anything else except for those two people. It's weird. It's like when they talk to each other, you kind of realize
Talk
it.
about
But
Lester
yeah,
Freeman. Yeah.
Lester and McNulty are the Wire to me.
You know,
Um,
I agree about McNulty being a great character and kind of an underrated character, because there's so many other great characters on this show that when people
mhm.
name them, they talk about Omar, they talk about Stringer, there's so many great characters, But I feel like McNulty as a character is interesting because if there's anything this show is not trying to do, it's be propaganda, you know?
Yeah.
Um,
Yes, for
and
sure.
like I've seen it criticized for kind of foregrounding that kind of storyline, but I also think that's one of the reasons why The Wire is so compelling is because it balances the sort of cops and criminals storyline with all this other stuff, the social critique stuff. But I feel
Yeah.
like I love the social critique stuff because of how well The Wire always handled the real, like really well drawn cop characters, really well drawn criminal characters. And
Yeah.
it's like you don't say good guys and bad guys on this show, though,
Yeah.
because it's both kinds. And I think that so it's funny how much your scene that you picked dovetails with my scene, Ronald, because it's not the same, but it's a similar aspect of McNulty. And it's one of
Okay.
my favorite little arcs of his, which is that at the end of the third season,
Uh,
he's kicked out of the homicide. Like Daniels makes good on his threat to kick him out. And he
yeah.
goes, but he busts him down to, but McNulty is happy to take the assignment, or he gets busted down to it. I can't quite remember the mechanics of it, but he's basically back walking the beat. And at the
Yeah.
end of season 3, there's this montage showing everybody where they are, and you see that McNulty is like happy on the street. That's also the episode where you see that Cuddy makes it out. There's different things that happen at the end of that season. It's the end of Amsterdam. That's all very, there's a montage that's really great. But the scene that is my moment from that episode is which sets all that in motion, which is Stringer has died in the previous episode, I believe. I think that's what happened. He died at the end of the previous one. And then in this one,
Rough scene, by the way.
we catch
Yeah.
up with Bunk and McNulty as
Mhm.
they are finding like Stringer's body and going through his pockets and stuff and getting the like phone cards from him and everything. And you can like there's this sort of anticlimax for McNulty because he hasn't caught Stringer. Like he was about
Yeah.
to. It was tightening, his net was tightening around him, and yet Stringer got by some other people. And then he says, "We got an ID with an address on it." And then the next scene we see, and this is the scene that always stands out to me, they're in Stringer's apartment. And it's
Yes.
this nice place. And they're looking around, and Bunk and McNulty are both kind of looking at each other like, this is Stringer's place. And it's not like they didn't know he was up to something because they
Right,
saw that
right,
he was
right.
studying. They know that he was like a guy who
Yeah.
had ambitions, but they didn't know quite who they were dealing with. And Stringer may have even been kind of a poser. Like we don't really know if maybe he didn't get got because he wasn't able to pull off what he was hoping to pull off with transitioning
Yeah.
into that legitimate business world. But it's an interesting thing to see McNulty's reaction to that. And what he says
Yeah.
is, who the fuck have I been chasing?
Yes.
And
Yes, man.
and I just thought that was such a great character beat for McNulty because in some ways he is the kind of bullheaded cop who's like on a mission. But in other
Yeah.
ways, you're right, Ronald. He's so sensitive to like nuances of human behavior. And in that scene, you realize like he's really having a hard time getting his head around the fact that like he didn't really get to catch the guy and that as much as he knew about him, he didn't know him. And I
Yeah.
think that
Yeah.
notion like that pays off and feeds into different aspects of The Wire. There's tons of characters you might think if you didn't get a better look at them on this show. And I just feel like that moment kind of sums up that, but it's part of that same thing you're talking about because it's what inspires him to like realize that maybe he was happiest being the guy sitting on the stoop talking to the neighborhood folks and that like that's
Yeah.
where he feels like he can be most useful and not like maybe then in season 5 when he gets back into the homicide division he does do something kind of crazy and reckless and backgrounding him for the entirety of season 4 pretty much was an interesting move that the show pulled that I think is a cool thing. But I agree with you, Ronald. Like when McNulty was back front and center, I know people don't like season 5 as much because it goes as kind of a little bit more pulpy. But I was really glad just to have a story with McNulty at the center of
Yeah.
it, doing his own kind of Amsterdam, his own kind of too crazy to be real, but could it work kind of scheme.
Right, right.
But no, yes, that scene, who the fuck have I been chasing? I think about it all the time,
It's so good, man. It's such a good scene because it's like you have an idea. I mean, you profile people. You have an idea because it helps you, especially that line of work. It helps you kind of hanker down and get to the work of it. You're like, this person's a criminal. He's a madman. That's come to find out he has records and books and reclaim wood.
Yeah,
It's like
right.
it's a lot deeper than you think. This is a full human. It's like this very interesting. Yeah, man.
So that's all that there is to say about The Wire. We just said every last word that needs to be said. No, but I mean, we both probably had 2 or 3 other moments that could have been our moment. So like I would just say if you haven't watched The Wire, um it is that good. I think that like
It
it's easy to
is.
maybe ignore it, and I think I even when I was watching scenes, it's like I do think it has a very matter of fact kind of visual style, but I don't think it's like a bad looking or
No.
badly shot or badly. I mean, I think it almost is so utilitarian, and they made a point of not being flashy with the direction ever, and doing like unmotivated camera moves and all this kind of stuff. And I think that made it seem almost like it didn't have a visual style to it. But looking back on it now, it feels so controlled and so paced. And again, just the dialogue and the characters and the
Yeah.
idea of approaching a city and peeling back one more layer of the onion every season. That was such a cool idea that when they came back for a season, you knew you were going to get a new angle on Baltimore.
Yeah.
But speaking of Baltimore, let's talk about some Baltimore movies and shows or whatever. I don't know who wants to get us started with this, but it's the idea here is we didn't really set a rule. We were just kind of thinking Baltimore-ness or Baltimore related or Baltimore adjacent.
Okay.
It's pretty open.
Just going through a round robin, just saying something, right?
Uh,
I'll start. One of my I'll say I have some commonalities with two of my picks here, but I'll start with the let me think here. How am I going to start this? I'll mix it up. I'm going to separate them. So the first movie that comes to mind for the list is not I wouldn't say it's my favorite if I had to rank these. I would say the first one that comes to mind is maybe only because actually I'm lying. It's probably my favorite. I don't know if I had to say a favorite. The first when you said this list, John, and when we talked about doing this idea, there's one movie that always comes up, and it's always Crybaby. And it's John Waters, it's Johnny Depp, when he was the movie star of all movie stars. And honestly, it's because it like was filming like a mile from where I grew up.
oh
So,
wow.
there's probably three
That's
or
really
four
cool.
locations that they filmed. And of the John Waters films, because I have another John Waters film on my list, and both of them are ones that really focus on the suburbs of Baltimore, and especially filming in the suburbs of Baltimore. I grew up in Owings Mills, Reisterstown area in Baltimore County, and a lot of the scenes from Crybaby were filmed in and around that area. There, I was able to watch some of this movie be filmed. I was able, at the time it came out, I think I was like 8 or 9 when it was filming, probably 8, and it filmed at one of the middle schools around where I live. The chicken sequence when they're running down the road is filmed like literally a half a mile from where my parents live, where I grew up. So being able to see like movie stars and like a real director, that was probably like my earliest exposure to like what a movie looks like in real life, when it's being made. And that said, I love Crybaby. Like I love the movie. I love the cast. I love the musical element of it. I love kind of how just kind of like the throwback vibe of like those 50s 60s star-crossed lovers from opposite sides of the track kind of things going for it. And
Mhm.
again, at the time, thinking about 1990, like Johnny Depp was like the highest maybe of the height of his power, whatever you want to say about that. But I mean, yeah, I just loved all the locations that they filmed that in and around town. I love the story. It's kind of grown into a cult classic, like many of his films were. But I can remember being so excited to go see it in a theater when it finally came out, and to see that middle school that is right down the street, to see the street that I drive on every day as a pretty important moment in the film. It was filmed like well, it's now closed, but I don't know if you guys remember Enchanted Forest out in Ellicott City.
Yeah.
It's filmed out there in Sykesville, all over the place. I mean, also a lot of stuff downtown, but like Beaver Dam Swim Club, like just things I went to in life as a kid. And it was just so cool to see it happening, a couple things in person, and then to watch it on the big screen. But yeah, I don't know. I've always loved the movie. And the moment that John, we talked about this idea for a Baltimore related episode, the first one that comes up is always Crybaby. So that's my first pick.
Random Crybaby fact. Like 2 weeks ago, Kino Lorber just released 4K of Crybaby.
Of course they did, and of
Of
course you
course they
have that
did.
information.
Yeah, of course,
Of course they did. Yeah. Well, here's how I know. I wanted it. I want it. I want
Oh,
it.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
But Kino Lorber and Arrow Video are doing like this crazy like March Madness sale. I
Oh,
mean, it's
cool.
April now, but you can get it for like 20 something dollars as opposed to like
Wow.
the normal $30-$40, which is it's pretty damn cool.
And honestly, the other thing also about it is like the music in it is really good.
Yeah.
Like the songs in the movie
Yeah.
are yeah, they're just like so kind of, some of them are like obviously like so tongue in cheek and cheesy, but like so catchy. Um, but yeah, I love it, love it. Who's next?
Well, I'll kind of piggyback on that one with my own sort of John Waters pick, but this is a bit unorthodox, but I do think it's fair to say because it's been in the news a lot recently. But since we're not necessarily picking movies we've seen or that exist yet, I want to talk about John Waters' Liarmouth as a movie that I'm excited is apparently actually happening. There was a weird story that got like picked up by The Guardian that was not substantiated at all a few weeks back, where it was like John Waters was supposed to be working with Aubrey Plaza on an adaptation, a film of his book Liarmouth. And within a couple days, he had refuted it, saying, I love her, but she hasn't been cast in the movie. The movie's not a go. And I thought to myself, I wonder if the way that everyone reacted, everybody I know in Baltimore shared that story and was like, oh my God. And it was like talk supposed to be getting ready to go in Baltimore. So many people got
Yeah,
excited. So much news. So there was so much goodwill towards this guy. I mean, I think we all love some aspect of John Waters, whether it's his image, whether it's his kind of erudite. He's a great like interview. He's smart about art. He's also kind of seen as like the god of trash, which is a funny thing to be when you're this erudite smart guy. But like he was able to
yeah,
craft this persona for himself that's like unlike anyone else. And it's such a great thing for Baltimore to have this weird kind of counterculture vibe that's like represented by him. And I think maybe it feeds off of him and the town. He feeds off of the town and the town feeds off of him. But the story, he refuted it. And now the news that's come out last couple days is Aubrey Plaza is
it's true.
cast in the
It's
film,
true.
and it's still not a go. Like, but I feel like wheels are in motion partially because, and I always want this to happen when fake news kind of proves that there's a hunger for something. It seems like there might be a little bit more interest in this project now because somebody either printed news too soon or took a rumor and made it fact or
Mm.
whatever. But if you
It's
even look at
called publicity. It's
but
called the PR machine.
if you look at the cover for Liarmouth, the painting on the cover even looks like Aubrey Plaza. So this does feel
Yeah,
like the right match. As someone who loves her right now, um, I think she's kind of perfect for this, like the sort of arch sarcastic world that, like, kind of what you were just saying, Steve. That sort of like
yeah,
heightened kind of. Is it sketchy? Is it cheesy? Is it making fun of stuff or is it
right.
sincere? I think all that is in play in the John Waters thing. So I just want to put goodwill in the universe towards Liarmouth and say it could actually be shooting in Baltimore before too long. I'm always surprised to find out people like John Waters or Spike Lee or whoever will talk about having problems getting the budget they need or the money that that is needed to make the kind of movies they want to make. So it has been 20 years since he's made a movie. And he said he's written 6 scripts in that time. So this one seems to be one that's going. So yes, just putting some good energy out in the universe towards Liarmouth, even if it turns out to, not star Aubrey Plaza when it finally comes into being. It's I don't know if you guys have read the book. I have it on my stack, but I haven't read it yet. But it sounds really fun and funny and shocking
Mm.
in that John Waters way. So yes,
Cool.
good old John Waters. And
Um,
also just I think it's good that you mentioned him, Steve, as a thing of like it's a ball you couldn't talk about just like you couldn't talk about
Yeah,
Baltimore film television without talking about The Wire. If you left out John Waters from this conversation, that would be a huge mistake.
for
mm.
sure.
Mine is so strange. So in 2009, there was a video game that came out called The Suffering. It was about a gentleman who was in prison named Torque, who was in jail for possibly killing his kid and his wife. We don't know why, but an earthquake hit this prison in Maryland, and then these evil spirits started to come from within the grounds and try to kill everybody. Now, the first one takes place in a prison in Maryland. The second one full on takes place in Baltimore. It is one of the scariest horror games I've ever played in my life. And I remember feeling seen when they said that it was in Baltimore, even though it was like a prison and all this stuff. but The Suffering 1 and 2. The Suffering
Wow.
2, The Ties That Bind is the one that is primarily in Baltimore.
The ties
I
that
am,
bind.
yeah,
Gotta
such a
love it.
crazy video game. It is so nuts. Like the scary guys are like these, like they all have like old school like prison torture sort of things. So like there's a guy with like his eyes open like a Clockwork Orange. And there's like these characters with like duct tape wrapped around their hand. They don't have hands, they have like spikes and they just kind of crawl around. And if you had a decent TV, like you could hear them kind of moving in stereo. It was so
Right.
cool. Scary ass game. Scary ass game. Baltimore was on the map in my head because
Isn't that
because of
funny when
that.
that happens? Where it's like if they just mention, it's like a combination of Steve Martin and the Jerk being excited to be in the phone book,
Yeah.
and that Leonardo DiCaprio meme of him pointing. No, yeah, that's him, right? Him point. That's from Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, I think, where he's pointing at the television. But like it's that thing of recognizing, like something, the name of the thing. A movie shot in Baltimore where you see locations or whatever. It is
Yeah.
kind of funny, and especially when it's a game or something like that, where it's like that. I mean, did they do anything to actually? Do you think they did their research, or did they just think Baltimore sounded cool for the game?
I mean, they try to do some like they tried. This is back in the day where things started to kind of look like they were real things.
Yeah.
Like, there's some downtown Baltimore, some stuff like that. So essentially, once they get out of jail, the first one takes place primarily in jail, and then the ties that bind take place in the streets of Baltimore. So like they try to do a little downtown, they try to do a little, the docks and stuff like that. So I think they did. I think they looked up a couple pictures on Getty Images, and then they said, "That's it. This is the city of Baltimore."
Oh, there are docks there. Okay, check. Do they have
Check,
buildings there? Okay, cool. Check.
check, check. So yeah, that game like really, it's like one of the big experiences. I remember finishing it.
Mm-hmm.
I love finishing video games. It feels like some sense of completion,
You've done
but.
something in your life. Yeah.
Yeah, and it takes place in Baltimore. I was like, yeah, I'm finishing the shit out of this game. So that's an odd one, but I'm glad I mentioned it. I had to get it off my chest.
My next one is another John Waters movie. This was the 1995's Serial Mom.
Mm.
This is
It's a good
a
one.
dark comedy. Just this idyllic like suburb family. The mother is like one of these perfect moms who does everything right for their family, for their kids, and she's also a serial killer. It's just like that sounds great for a John Waters movie,
Yeah, it's perfect.
especially one, yeah, again, like taking place. This is something that's shot in and around an area that we all three of us are, a lot of time in Towson, Towson, Lutherville, Cockeysville, like that whole area, shot around in around downtown. Um, but yeah, I don't know. It's just like another one of those over the course of that early '90s run. He had a couple great films come out that I was able to again see some of it filmed. At that time, I'm more like 14, 15 years old, and I'm able to get to
Mm,
and watch some of that stuff being filmed on location, which is really fun. There's a lot of scenes in the movie, like when they're in shopping centers and um, like the scene where Rosemary steals her parking space. I don't know if you
Mm-hmm.
remember the movie. There, I
Yeah.
was remember being able to watch that scene be filmed, just cool stuff. But also, again, really found the movie great. Like it's like one of these dark comedies, and I guess maybe it's like the Baltimore of it all, and it's John Waters, but it's like came out. I'm like Kathleen Turner. I also love Matthew Lillard at the time, and he plays the son in the movie or her son in the movie. So he was in that as well. He's also in a really good movie that shot at Towson University with Michael Vartan that I don't know if you guys have ever heard of called The Curve or Dead Man's
no.
Curve. What's another title that it had?
I've heard of that, but that also it comes from outside the movie, that phrase.
Yeah,
So.
yeah. But that's another. Yeah, I think he filmed that like a couple years after this. But so he had Matthew Lillard was in and around Baltimore quite a bit. But yeah, I don't know. Serial Moms is really great. I just love how kind of twisted and dark and ridiculous it is, and the courtroom scene and seeing people like rally around a mother who has her own justifications for taking care of her family and by any means necessary. And how people can make sense of that. She gets her own little following in the movie. It's maybe, I don't know, that kind of craziness kind of translates a little differently in today's day and age, but in 1995, watching it as a teenager, I thought it was pretty great. And I still really like Serial Mom, so that's my second pick.
Our picks are sort of like, dovetailing a little bit.
Okay, cool.
From waters to waters before. This is another one that's odd because I don't think any of this, I don't think a frame of this is shot in Baltimore or even in the area, but it's set here. And I like the idea that Mads Mikkelsen's Hannibal has an office in Baltimore. I like the
Yeah,
idea
me
that the
too.
Chesapeake area and the Virginia, Baltimore. I just like the idea that there's that many
Yeah,
bizarre
yeah, yeah.
serial killers just here in Baltimore. So I think there's something about why I don't really know why Thomas Harris put Hannibal in Baltimore in his books, which is like where his offices are. Um, but I think it works really well somehow, like as a completely not based on reality. I mean, honestly, I think pretty much the entirety of the show is shot in Toronto.
Oh
Um,
wow.
so nothing
I'll
is
say like
is
Red Dragon. Like I think some of those movies were shot here.
right. I think some of the movies
Yeah,
may have been, but
yeah,
specifically the television show, the Hannibal television show was the thing I was thinking of because that's like it kept coming back around to it, and every time they would mention Baltimore or they would show Hannibal's office, it just kind of was funny to me
yeah.
because the it they're almost like treating Baltimore like it's Gotham City or something on that show,
Right.
with the tone and everything. But I do think they made non-existent Baltimore look really cool and really moody. And I always thought it was a great looking show. And it was just it's always been kind of a fun thing about Hannibal Lecter that like he's technically supposed to be a guy who has a sort of mid-Atlantic accent or something. Like we think of him as Anthony Hopkins or European or whatever, but like technically, if you listen to the voice that Anthony Hopkins is doing for Hannibal, he's kind of adopting sort of like a funny kind of little American accent. I mean, Mads Mikkelsen's not trying to hide his accent at all when he plays him, but just this idea of Hannibal as a sort of, a mid-Atlantic creation, I think is, even though he comes from Europe. I just think it's an interesting thing that has always been part of the character for me. And when I moved here, that part of the story, like that was one of those representations of Baltimore that was in my mind, when I came here to Baltimore. It was just, oh yeah, that's where Hannibal's office is supposed to be. So yeah, the make-believe non-existent Baltimore of the television show Hannibal.
Mm,
How many serial killers do you think are on every block in Baltimore?
at least three.
At least three.
At least three. At least three. Um. Oh, what's my pick? Okay, so I mean, hate to tag along, man. We John Waters it up. This
Let's
is
go.
I went to a very special um screening of Hairspray and
Oh yeah.
at the Ocean City Film Festival, where it was like real-time commentary. He just kind of sat and had a little screen and he just
Oh, that's
spoke.
cool.
His memory of Baltimore is nuts. Like, um, I know people in their 30s that can't recall some of the information that he was recalling, and he's 77 years old. Then went to a Vogue party right afterwards. Like, this is like it was really cool. But he gave everybody the time of day. I mean, Hairspray is a masterpiece. I don't know if there's any other way to put it. It's a strange story that works somehow. Ricky Lake is kind of the heart of that movie, and Divine, who plays Ricky's mom, um, just a force. Um, and the way that it handles the subject of race is done in a way that just feels really ahead of its time. Even though it's covering something that clearly isn't of the time that it's in. But yeah, just very cool. Beautiful Deborah Harry, just like Jerry Stiller being incredibly funny. One thing that uh John was talking about was apparently Jerry Stiller was like an insanely intense like method actor. So he just acted like he was married to Divine the whole time. And I think he got to freak Divine out because he's like really committed to the role. I think that Divine thought it was just gonna be kind of like a jokey thing. Like Jerry wanted to get into a headspace where he's like, I'm married to this person. We have a
Right.
relationship. And I don't think that Divine was mentally ready for that, which I thought was so funny.
Well, it's hard to imagine like on set with Divine that Divine wouldn't be the like the one who was making the other actor be like, "What's this person doing?" But the fact that Jerry
Yeah,
Stiller is just that intense that even Divine was like, "What is this guy?
that
What's this
was
guy
so
doing?"
funny. And Devon plays another character too, one
Mhm.
of the judges on the show, which I thought was really cool. Um, so if you look very closely, during the filming of the show, there's also a judge that's picking some of the dancers that is also Divine. Really cool. So that's my pick. Baltimore's Hairspray. Masterpiece
Lots of love
filmmaking.
for Mr. Waters.
So
Yes.
good. Yeah, yeah.
So my final pick is one of the best, probably top 3 or 4 comedy shows of all time that I think we've all were benefit, or we all were fortunate enough to maybe run across some of the casta while we worked at the fruit stand. Um, but I would be remiss if I didn't mention Veep. I know, the first 4 seasons of the show at least filmed a lot in Baltimore and Baltimore
Yeah.
for DC. um, it moved, production, I think, got to California around the 5th season and still did some stuff in DC after that. But a lot of the filming in and around Baltimore, Towson area, downtown, locations that doubled for different areas in DC. I think Veep is, again, one of the best comedies series ever. 7 seasons of show that are all great. I think. I mean, maybe you could pick your favorites, but I think, for an actress to be involved in, I'm not a Seinfeld guy, but I can respect it. But for her to have another show that is arguably one of the best comedy series of all time,
Right.
it's kind of
Yeah.
like it's absolutely insane to me. And again, for the series to go for 7 seasons and be as funny at the end as it was at the beginning, it's just kind of unheard of. But yeah, I love seeing like signs up around town, like when we were working out in the area, about filming. And I think I'd already left Apple at that time, but no, I was still there when they were filming I guess the first 2 seasons. But yeah, I don't know, it was just awesome to be around town and to see the signs for Veep out there in that area in downtown. um and again, like, the show has like tons of like comedic geniuses on it. Like, the
Yeah.
cast was
Yeah.
absurd.
Insane.
And to see them in and around the area where we were, and in the store that we used to work at, was really cool. But yeah, again, the fact that a show that will arguably be one of the best comedy series of ever, the first, for half of its run to be filmed in my hometown, our hometown, Ronald and I, and your new home, John,
Yeah.
um
My
is awesome.
forever home.
It's awesome to me. I just, like, John Waters is kind of our guy, and he's like,
Yeah.
he's the benchmark of, like, I think, entertainment, and, like, and justifiably so, obviously represented on this episode. Like, we love him and what he puts out. And I think, just, to kind of also say that there's a production that filmed half of this run here, and even if it wasn't really to be Baltimore, there were some parts of the show that did take place in Baltimore. um but to have the city double for DC was still awesome. And to be, Veep was like a show that was, again, I mentioned, like, the whole appointment viewing feeling. It's like every week Veep came out, it's like, oh
Yeah.
god, can't wait for another episode to laugh my ass.
Right.
No, totally. I'm kind of glad you put this one on because it made it easier for me with with my next pick. But the fact that this show was like that, you sort of felt like there was that brief period where HBO in particular seemed to be using Baltimore DC
Yeah.
this area as much as they could.
There's like
And
massive tax credits. Like there,
yeah,
that was that run where like
yeah.
the film commission in Maryland was like anything and everything that could film here. There was incredible tax relief for it.
And I've heard different reasons why. I mean, there's supposedly that's a huge part, obviously. Supposedly there's a lot of kind of standing crew, maybe because there's been a run, but for at
Right.
least a little while there, people could come here and get like, basically a world-class crew, but not in New York or LA. The
Right.
problem is people here, no matter how great of a job they get here, no matter how great their career is here, they typically go to New York or LA, if they're
Right.
that good.
Right.
Yeah.
But that cycle of people coming through supposedly was big. And another thing that they said was that the variety of locations in
Yeah,
Baltimore
definitely.
and in and around Baltimore, that like you can get to the coast, you can get to the beach before too long, you can get to the mountains,
Yeah,
without too
West.
much
Yeah.
effort. You can definitely get to some wilderness very close by. Um, so I think that is something that like you'll find different cities that have that to offer. Like I think right now Atlanta
Yeah.
has been the city that a lot
Yeah.
of people go shoot in because you do have this huge urban area, and all the modern stuff you could want, but you're also very close to a lot of wilderness and a lot of places where you can either construct huge sets or, you know, it's interesting when a city has a run like that. And I wonder
Yeah.
if Baltimore, if it's been consistent or if it's sustainable or if it'll come back. But I do think that that way that Veep kind of blurred the line between Baltimore and DC is funny. If you know the area, you can always kind of tell when people try to pass Baltimore off as like
For
Georgetown or
sure.
whatever.
For sure.
Um, well, my next pick, my last pick is because you invoked Veep, I get to be very sentimental with my sentimental favorite. This is a film from 1989, no, 1988. Which was based on a book by Ann Tyler. This was co-written and directed by Lawrence Kasdan. This is a film called The Accidental Tourist, which was definitely shot. I mean, a lot of the stuff is like you can, find specific addresses of the houses and stuff, like places. I think Roland Park got some action in this.
Hmm.
But just it's a very interesting, moody kind of movie. Like William Hurt plays a guy who's sort of he's a guy who writes travel guides, but he hates traveling, and so the theme of his travel guides is like travel guide for reluctant travelers, and it's all about him and his kind of quirky family, and it's like before the Wes Anderson of it all,
Right.
where it's a little bit more grounded, but it still has a little bit of that. Like his brothers are played by David Ogden Stiers and Ed Begley Jr., and
Oh, right, right.
they're great. Um, and I think his publisher, or maybe his editor, is played by haven't seen this movie in forever, but it's played by Bill Pullman, who kind of
Oh,
gets
yeah.
sucked into the pull of the family. Like he comes in and he's like an outsider, but then he falls for the sister. But it's just that they're so weird and they're so odd. And William Hurt is such a guy who's like hiding from life and kind of like holds things at arm's length. And then in comes crashing Gina Davis's character, Muriel Pritchett, who I've heard people say she's kind of a prototypical manic pixie dream girl type. I think she's a little bit more kind of almost unstable and erratic and real than that. But she's a woman with a small child, and she's just having a tough time. And so it's sort of an unlikely friendship and romance of sorts between those two characters, William Hurt and Gina Davis. But William Hurt and his ex-wife Kathleen Turner or his soon-to-be ex-wife, they've lost a child, and so their marriage is on the rocks or
Oh,
over. I can't
wow.
remember where the story picks it up, but it's one of those stories where it's sort of it's about moving forward in life and maybe getting past that kind of tragedy. But it's also got lots of interesting, quirky character bits and some things that I remember really laughing at. But really, what I remember about this movie was how much my dad loved this movie. Like he would,
Wow.
watch it.
Oh wow.
It was just one of those movies. And so every time I've watched it, if you ever do that, where you're like, your dad or your mom loves something so
Yeah,
much,
yeah.
you watch it and you kind of feel like you're going, yeah, I can kind of see what they get from it. But knowing now Baltimore, just the Baltimore-ness, the fact that this was, set in Baltimore and largely shot in Baltimore, um, is very apparent. So it's one of those movies that kind of gave me an idea of what Baltimore might look like before I came here. And yeah,
Yeah.
just because of my dad, I think I saw it several times. And I think I don't know that it holds up 100%, but I do think it would be an interesting movie to revisit because of just all the people I just mentioned that are in it, doing really good work. And I think this is the movie that Gina Davis won an Academy Award for, right?
I'm not familiar with it.
Yes, Gina
Honestly.
Davis won Best Supporting Actress for her
Wow.
role in this film. So, and also if you know Lawrence Kasdan, you know the kind of like human moment that he can kind of traffic in. He's good with dialogue. He's good with characters. He co-wrote the screenplay
So
with
this is the
Frank
best
Galati.
picture nominee.
Yeah,
Wow.
it was a huge movie that year.
Wow, that's incredible. I have to check this out.
Cool.
Add to the watch list. Yeah, your last one, Ronald?
Bring it
Last
home,
one.
Ronald.
Okay, so this movie is supposedly taking place in DC, but I happened to be in Baltimore as a kid watching this thing get filmed. It made no sense to me because it was clearly Baltimore, clearly a Baltimore mall. This is the superhero that I know, my favorite superhero, Meteor Man. Robert Townsend's attempt at making a superhero film. It's it's silly and fun, and the stakes get really crazy really quick. When the blonde bleach blonde gang comes into Baltimore to sell drugs, and they really start hurting people, and then Meteor Man gets hit by a meteor and evolves into this character that can, he can absorb information from books in seconds. He can fly, he could lift things, it's a cool movie. It's a cool movie, and I think about it a lot. But when I was a kid, yeah, I remember coming around in Northeast Baltimore. My aunt was watching me while my mom worked, and seeing the set and seeing a cape and seeing a trailer, and it's like all these things are really fresh in my brain. Like, I don't know, it's weird. Like, as a Baltimorean, you really get to see a lot of filmmaking, during especially when we were younger.
Yeah.
So it's just a matter of time before I tried to make something. It's just too much stuff happening around us. But yeah, Meteor Man really had a huge impact on me as a kid. And I nothing's come out quite like it. This maybe if they do like a Black Green Lantern, like they've been kind of hinting at some point, but
no, there is a great Black Green Lantern
yeah.
character, like John Stewart.
Yep.
It's odd that that's his name because that's a small Jewish comedian. But what was the show that wasn't Robert Townsend in something recently where he played someone's dad and he was really
The
good?
Bear.
The Bear.
The Bear.
He was so good.
Come on.
Because it was kind of a where's he been before that, and then here he is popping up.
Yeah, he was Io Adabiri's dad. And don't get me started. That whole conversation they had was,
Unbelievable.
really great. Yeah. And Robert Townsend is one of those people, man. I, I don't know if you know anything about the story of Hollywood Shuffle, man. He
Oh, of course.
wrote it with Keenan Ivory Wayans, charged all his credit cards. For the listeners, man, Hollywood Shuffle is an incredible movie that's kind of made it to the Criterion Collection, but the story of it is even more amazing. I also would suggest watching The Making of the Five Heartbeats. It's another one of those stories where you watch a guy have no money and, just credit cards, loans from friends. Just a really cool um, director that just I hope he makes something new. It's been a really long time since he's made something. But seeing him on The Bear gives me hope that he'll keep acting and keep making things, because that was a super surprise. I got chills seeing Robert Townsend. I remember him from HBO's HBO used to have a comedy showcase which had like David Allen Greer, Damon Wayans, uh yeah, just huge stars that he
Yeah.
was always kind of in his atmosphere. So
But I mean, that was legendary. Hollywood Shuffle was one of those
Hollywood
movies that came out
Shuffle.
of nowhere and was just like also made jokes at a time when people may have been making those jokes. If you had your ear to the rail, you were hearing like comedians talk about some of that stuff. But it was like just that idea of looking at the way that Hollywood depicts Black people And also the scarcity of mainstream movies. I mean, we could still talk about like, but not
Yeah.
just featuring black people, but with people behind the camera, you know. And I mean, it's obviously it's better than it used to be, but it's still crazy. So no,
Yeah,
that
it's still really
Robert
weird.
Townsend.
He directed. I know he has been directing stuff. I know I saw his name.
Oh, he directed something recently? I know he's
Well,
directed episodes
he
of stuff.
TV. Yeah, I would say it's
Yeah, I know
TV. He did
he's
like
heavy.
he did the spin-off series for the Best Man that was on Peacock.
Oh, he directed an
Uh,
episode? That's
yeah,
cool.
or multiple. He did that. He did the Wonder Years reboot. I know I saw him on that
Okay.
as a director.
Oh,
And then um what was that Tracy Morgan show? The Last OG.
yeah, I like the last
He
one.
did some of those too. But yeah, I love
That's
Robert.
pretty
Yeah,
cool.
funny you mentioned the Five Heartbeats. That's one of my favorite like music movies of all time.
So good.
I fucking love that movie
Yeah.
so much.
Have you seen the
Uh,
making of it?
yes, it's incredible.
It's so
Amazing.
good.
It's
It's
amazing.
so good.
No,
Yeah.
absolutely. I'm glad you mentioned. I love. Yeah, it's like anytime somebody knows that movie exists is awesome because yeah, that's a wonderful movie.
It is. I'm glad you like it.
Well, I'm going to rattle off some of these that other people mentioned because it is a
Yeah,
little bit
please.
shocking that we
Yeah.
miss some of these people, some of these directors. The first one, I'll just say it's a little bit shocking that we didn't do a Levinson. Barry Levinson is a huge Baltimore presence in film too. A lot of people, my friend Laura Komich Frank and another friend Carolyn Harmondaro and another friend Jason Eaton all came in to say Enemy of the State, starring Gene Hackman and Will Smith,
Sure.
is a great Baltimore movie, and I do think it's like it's a great Tony Scott movie, or maybe it's like second tier or something Tony Scott, but it's like it's definitely very Baltimore. You know, it's one of those
Yeah.
places. It's one of those movies where you can watch the locations.
See it, yeah.
Marissa Canino suggested Home for the Holidays with Robert
It's a
Downey
good one.
Jr. and Holly Hunter. Bob Rose said, obviously, the only correct answer is he's just not that into you. Um,
I don't know if I've
John
ever
Nagel.
seen it.
John Nagel mentioned that Elaine Bennis on Seinfeld, the Julia Louis-Dreyfus character, she was from
She
Towson.
is.
Yeah.
She is.
So that was something he said made him feel proud, feel civic pride. He says whenever it came up. Howard Yang mentions the sum of all fears when Baltimore gets nuked from a vending machine located inside a domed football stadium. He also
That's
mentions
hilarious.
in a Triple X State of the Union when Ice Cube jumps the boat into the Hanover State Bridge. Keanu Reeves in The Replacements is something Kevin Perkins mentioned. There was another couple of good ones. Oh, we got to mention because friend of the show Lauren Wareham says the only correct answer is Step Up and Step Up 2.
Yeah. Gotta include those.
She'll accept no criticism on the matter, true to form. Let's see. Oh, and then there's the like I said, the Barry Levinson thing. My friend Becca mentioned the film Diner, which of course is a huge film. Says it's been a long time since she's watched it. I remember really liking Ten Men too, which is another Barry Levinson film, which is definitely like soaking in Baltimore-ness. And if I'd had time to watch it before this episode, it may have been on my list. But that's a movie starring Richard Dreyfuss and Danny DeVito that Barry Levinson directed. That is very Baltimore. But I don't know. I think that might be. I'm going to look at this list one more time and make sure we're not missing anything. Yeah, there's a little bit more love here for the cast of Veep kind of poking around town, but that seems to be it. But it is a little sad that we didn't get a Levinson in there. He does have a lot of Baltimore clout, and he definitely has been a person who kind of put Baltimore on the map as a filmmaker from here, but also someone who has shot a lot of things here. But
when I was in high school, like I think I was like 13, I was almost in a Barry Levinson movie. Do you remember Liberty Heights?
Yeah.
So I went to like a casting call, like an open for extras, like as sort of as a joke, not a joke, but it was happening someplace that we were. And we just like went in, me and my brother and my friend, and I got a call back to go. And I went downtown and I got like sized and fitted for the outfit and everything of the period. And then like I was like all about doing it. And then I realized, they said how much I'd have to be, like how long I'd have to be there. And I was obviously still in school. And yeah, that wasn't happening. So I couldn't be out of school for like 3 days or 4 days of a week. And I was like, my mom's like, yeah, that's not happening. It's like, oh, that sucks because that would have been cool to be an. I was an extra in the outfield in Major League 2. when they filmed. That's when they filmed at Oriole Park at Camden Yards. There was like a scene in the outfield, like they told you to wear like your like if you have Cleveland Indians colors to the game, and they filmed some crowd shots for like B-roll stuff or whatever. I don't know that you could see any of us, but I know that I was there the night they did that. That was pretty cool.
That's pretty damn cool.
Yeah, it was funny. It is kind of funny that there's like, there was a run. You're right, Ronald. You mentioned it earlier. Like when we were like, I feel like the 80s, 90s, like our young adult, there was a lot of stuff being filmed in Baltimore.
A ton of stuff.
Like it's weird that like we never stumbled on to like more of an extra or like got onto a movie or something.
Man, Veep fed every comic that I knew that was like didn't have a job.
Oh wow.
Like fed every comic I knew. Like had some scene where they were in a suit. Oh, I gotta wear a suit. Yeah, it was really cool.
Just to see him in a suit.
Just see him in a suit. What's the name? Was filmed here too. Sometimes a Netflix show with Kevin Spacey.
Oh yeah, House of Cards was on the list.
House of Cards was filmed here a ton. That's when I found out that Kevin Spacey was creepy. I found that out years before the world knew that he was.
Are you sure it wasn't Foghorn Leghorn that you were talking about?
I say,
boy, when it comes to still politics, so I can grope you.
I really don't like that he kind of came out of nowhere like Batman and pushed that girl into the train. I was like, what?
I've been waiting to say. He's like, I've been waiting to say that since 2013.
I love it.
Now's my time.
God damn it!
I had to get that off my chest.
Building up.
That is so out of character. It was such a weird thing to have happen. Patooey. Patooey.
Well, that's Baltimore. Yeah. That's pretty much it, right? There's nothing else to say.
That's it. That's the final word. Movieschmovie.com is the website. You can go there to listen to past episodes, to subscribe to the podcast on an audio platform of your choice. And if you like the video, the visual, the goods, as we say in the business, look at John. Yeah, you can see what he's doing with his hair right now.
Fixing those
go to YouTube, youtube.com/movie podcast and subscribe, hit that bell so you get notifications when Ronald puts up every week's video. You would don't do any work really from that point. You just get a little alert. We're gonna have a special episode.
Sorry, Steve, you're making it too simple. You're making it too simple for these people.
I don't know. I need to make it harder. Make it more difficult.
Yeah, I think
I'll come up with a better plan next week.
People feel better if they had to go through more trouble than that, Ronald. You're making it way too easy posting those clips. All they have to do is click. What the fuck?
Yeah, put a secret password that gets mailed out weekly or something. No,
they have to go somewhere and dig soming up.
Well, and there's a cipher inside of it.
Yeah.
Let's brainstorm that.
Yeah.
We're gonna be off next week of our regular Friday release, but we're gonna have a special 0.5 episode come out next Monday for a little indie film that we were able to see called Hundreds of Beavers. So we're gonna have that come out on the 15th. That's the day that film comes out.
Not a porn
digital release.
Yeah.
What'd you say?
Not a porn film.
No, not a porn film at all.
No, that one's the following week.
Yeah.
But after that, we'll be back the week after next, and we'll get back to the regularly scheduled program. But thank you so much for listening, and as always, you've made our day. Thanks.
Bye.